Welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in, all right? Look, I want you to think back to a time, and hey, maybe it's literally right now, where everyone around you just seemed to have the whole game figured out. You know what I mean, right? They picked careers, they built relationships, they bought houses, and they just moved forward with this visible momentum that looked completely, totally effortless from the outside. And there you stood, watching them, feeling this intense sensation that you couldn't quite put your finger on. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't exactly jealousy, and it wasn't exactly confusion either. It was something closer to a really painful, sinking realization that the path everyone else was walking just didn't belong to you. And yet, for the life of you, you couldn't find yours either. So naturally, you hesitated. You wandered around a bit, you started a bunch of projects, and then just stopped them. You watched years literally pass by while the people around you accumulated all the standard markers of a well-built life. But somewhere underneath all of that wandering and all of that hesitation, there was a quiet, unshakable certainty. A little voice that you couldn't fully silence kept telling you this exact phrase: I am not behind, I am just not ready yet. Well, today, we're going to look at why that voice was entirely correct and why validating that gut feeling is the absolutely crucial first step to understanding your actual trajectory.
Okay, let's dive into this because the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung spent decades studying the human mind, and he made one of the most brilliant, overlooked observations in modern psychology. Not all people are designed to succeed early. Period. If you've been agonizing over whether you're falling behind, Jung's research provides a really profound answer for us. Some personalities are simply built for something else entirely. They are built for a life that does not unfold in a straight, predictable line, but rather one that spirals deeply inward before it ever expands outward into the world.
Section 1. Feeling out of sync, when the standard path just doesn't fit. Now, you really have to understand exactly why you experience that incredibly painful contrast in your early years. Most people build their identity the fast way, along what we can call the standard path. They just absorb the world around them. They copy the values, the goals, the ambitions of their peers. And you know what? It works. It produces fast, early confidence. You know the type, the 22-year-old with a 10-year plan and a perfectly ironed suit. But it almost always produces shallow foundations. The rare path, on the other hand, works entirely differently. If you have this rare personality type, your inner world is unusually vivid. Your thoughts, your emotions, your intuitions, they all collide with an intensity that most people literally never experience. Because this inner world is so loud, adapting quickly to society's demands becomes almost impossible. It's like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation meant for a shed. You need time to dig deep first.
Section 2. Built for depth over speed. The psychology of the rare personality. Your hesitation isn't a flaw at all. It's actually a feature of a highly complex psychological system. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the term Jung used to describe this journey: individuation. He believed this was the rarest and most powerful path a human being could possibly walk. When you couldn't just become what society asked you to become, it wasn't because you were just being rebellious or difficult, not at all. It was because your psyche was actively refusing a false alignment. It recognized, even before you had the words to articulate it, that becoming what everyone else needed you to be would require abandoning a core part of yourself that you simply couldn't afford to lose. You are quite literally wired for depth, not speed.
Jung offered a pretty stark warning about fighting this natural process. He said that forcing this rare personality into a premature identity just to satisfy society's expected timeline does not produce success. It produces fracture. As the quote goes, a life lived in the wrong shape eventually cracks at the seams. All that hesitation and delay you felt, that wasn't a weakness, guys. That was your psyche fiercely protecting the true self that was still forming in the background. Section 3. Incubation, not stagnation, the invisible work of your 20s. We have to completely reframe how we view those early decades. In your 20s, the contrast between you and everyone else was probably agonizing. But notice the big difference here. On the standard side, others were busy building social structure, getting promotions, getting married, projecting massive social confidence and visible momentum. Meanwhile, you just felt stuck. Maybe you even retreated into isolation. But Jung would argue that while they were busy building social structures, you were doing the grueling, totally invisible work of building psychological structure. You were doing heavy internal labor, consciously and unconsciously unlearning borrowed beliefs.
You were quietly wrestling with massive, life-altering questions, like who you actually are and what you must stop pretending about. Questions that most people don't even begin to confront until they hit a massive midlife crisis. Yes, asking who you are actually slows you down early on. For sure, you pay a heavy price in confusion and wandering, but you completely avoid paying the terrible price later on. That hollow, gut-wrenching feeling of waking up at 45 and realizing you built a wildly successful life on completely borrowed foundations. Section 4. The burden of consciousness. Why structural loneliness is mandatory. Choosing this authentic path introduces a very specific, very heavy challenge. This is one of the least talked about, yet absolutely most isolating aspects of the rare personality. From a very early age, you saw things you weren't really supposed to see. You noticed the gap between what people said and what they actually meant. You saw the social games operating underneath ordinary conversations, and the absolute emptiness inside the things everyone else was chasing with such blind conviction. Jung called this the burden of consciousness. Greater awareness basically equals greater suffering. How do you enthusiastically compete in a game that you fundamentally don't believe in? You can't, so you withdraw. And tragically, society mislabels this psychological withdrawal as passivity or just a sheer lack of ambition. But your soul wasn't broken. It was just refusing to cooperate with a lie. Let's move to and see how this builds across a timeline. This isn't just random wandering, it's a deeply structured developmental trajectory. First, in your early 20s, you refuse false alignment. Then, usually peaking right around your late 20s or early 30s, you hit this profound structural loneliness. Your inner complexity makes shallow connections feel infinitely worse than having absolutely no connection at all. You might feel like an alien even among people who genuinely like you, simply because what you carry inside doesn't translate into normal social small talk. This loneliness is a critical, highly fragile crossroads. And right at that lonely crossroads is exactly where many rare personalities break. The isolation just becomes way too much. So they numb themselves. They conform. They trade their emerging authentic self for the temporary relief of finally belonging somewhere. But Jung was incredibly clear about the cost of this betrayal. If you conform just to escape the loneliness, you create a permanent shadow self. You invite in lifelong resentment, bitterness, and a quiet, agonizing hatred of the version of yourself you had to become just to be accepted. You absolutely must endure the loneliness without surrendering. Section 5. The quiet, late emergence. Trading anxiety for coherence. If you do endure it, you reach the final stage, where you finally trade all that lingering anxiety for deep, unbreakable coherence. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what happens, usually somewhere in your mid-30s. Something internal just settles. You finally stop racing on timelines that were never yours to begin with. Notice the huge difference here. Conventional confidence is loud and often pretty fragile because it relies entirely on external applause. But inner coherence, it's quiet, it's incredibly durable, and it's grounded in a decade of internal labor that absolutely nobody else saw. Clarity replaces anxiety. Self-trust entirely replaces endless comparison. You reach this beautiful, grounded state. Because this self wasn't borrowed, because you literally bled for it, wandering and questioning for years, it has a massive, undeniable weight to it. When you finally step into your success, it doesn't rot from the inside out the way early borrowed success so often does. Your life and your work finally become a genuine expression of who you are, rather than something that just consumes you. So many of you have been walking this long, lonely path, thinking you were broken or just hopelessly behind. You aren't. You might just be early for a completely different kind of life, the kind of rich, deeply authentic life that simply cannot be rushed. The years that looked like absolutely nothing from the outside were actually intense, completely necessary preparation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep trusting your own timeline, and as you step into it, I want you to ask yourself one final thing. Which part of this journey resonates most deeply with you, and what are you finally ready to stop pretending about?